Hi, I'm Dr. Rick Curry, and today we're going to take a deeper look at understanding speech anxiety and then 4 tips for managing it. We're going to talk about what speech anxiety is, understanding that there is a physiological stress component to speech anxiety, that it follows a predictable pattern, and then that gives us 4 tips that will help you manage any public speaking anxiety that you may have. So, what are we so afraid of? As FDR proclaimed in one of the most famous speeches in American
The
history,
only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
well, that may be true, FDR, but it sure looks like folks are afraid of a lot of other things too. And if you're afraid of, well, flying, for instance, whoever created this graphic sure isn't helping. I mean, come on. Engines on fire? Like, I'm not personally afraid of flying, but I am afraid of catastrophic engine failure and the pending doom that would likely come in that scenario. But I digress. You can see from this graphic the top 10 things that people say they're afraid of. And there's some heavy ones on here: intimacy, commitment, spiders, like, ugh, my number one fear in life. And right up there, though, between the plane on fire and a girl standing on an office chair, afraid of heights, apparently, we have public speaking, the number 2 thing on this list that people are most afraid of, clocking in a full 4 spots higher than death. Think about that. People are more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying. So, speech anxiety is the anxiety that people experience when they think about or engage in communication. Key points here: think about or engage. So, for most people, yes, we experience most of our speech anxiety when we actually try to engage in public speaking or the act of communication. So, it may happen when we get in front of the audience and we first start to speak. That's when speech anxiety is strongest for most individuals. However, some people can experience speech anxiety when they are planning or thinking about communicating or whatever that event might be. So, for instance, your teacher says, "Hey, you guys have a speech next week." Well, that creates panic and anxiety, speech anxiety in a lot of people. Maybe your boss says, "Hey, I want you to talk about XYZ in an upcoming meeting." Well, actually thinking about and planning for that event can create anxiety for individuals. And so understanding your pattern of anxiety is something that we're going to talk about today, but we do need to acknowledge and understand that we experience speech anxiety differently. It is based on our own individual speech anxiety concerns. And so I love this quote from Mark Twain. He says, "There are only 2 types of speakers in the world. One, the nervous, and 2, liars." And I think that is a profound quote because the research backs this up. It says the fear of public speaking, the technical term also known as glossophobia, you'll never hear it called that unless you're reading a textbook. The fear of public speaking, speech anxiety. Almost 3/4 of people suffer from some form of speech anxiety. Three of 4. That is a remarkably high statistic, and you will see that it impacts and affects men as equally as it impacts and affects women. So essentially, we could make a broad blanket statement and say that the fear of public speaking and speech anxiety impacts all of us. So now that we've defined what speech anxiety is, let's look at some of the reasons why we have it. The first is the spotlight effect, and that's the tendency to believe that other people are paying more attention to you than in fact they actually do. So have you ever stumbled upon your words in a presentation or made a mistake while speaking and then spent the rest of the day thinking that every person who was in that room during that event now thinks you're just a horrible, terrible speaker? Or what about when you were walking down the street and you tripped over your shoelace or on the sidewalk and you became overwhelmed by the thought that the entire city was now staring and laughing at you? Or maybe you spilt some coffee or water on your pants and became paranoid that all of your colleagues were judging your cleanliness. This egocentric proclivity is referred to as the spotlight effect, or the tendency to feel and believe that we are the sole focus of an audience's attention. And it's amplified virtually, or it's amplified when we take the stage, even virtually, even when we're doing a Zoom or a WebEx, because the moment that we start that presentation, the moment we step foot onto the stage and begin to talk, that is when we feel that we are under the spotlight. And it is in those instances that we experience uncomfortable emotional states such as heightened self-consciousness, but we also experience distortions in how we imagine other people are viewing us. We think that they're judging us and that they're viewing us in these same negative lenses in which we're applying to ourselves. And it simply isn't true. You see, as humans, we are inherently hyper-focused on ourselves. We're worried that everyone is judging our bad hair day. They're judging that ketchup stain on our shirt or that cat and dog hair that's on our clothes despite our best lint rolling efforts. In reality, few people notice any of these things, as other people are oblivious to those mistakes. And even if people did notice, well, they wouldn't really care. And that's because we're too busy worrying about our own issues. So strategy 1 to overcoming speech anxiety is to realize that people don't really care. Now that sounds bad on the surface level, but it's not malicious. People don't mean to not care. They're just so focused on what's going on in their own lives that they really don't care about the mistakes that we make in presentations. I want you to ask yourself this in an activity. How often do you think about others? So think back to the last time you were at the store. Now try to remember other details about people you encountered in those situations. Do you remember the ketchup stains on their shirts? Do you remember the pet hair on their pants? Probably not, and that's because we're always thinking about ourselves and our own issues. And even when we do notice someone's mistakes or mishaps, it holds such brief staying power in our thoughts because the focus required in our own daily task, we simply just don't have the time to worry about other people's issues like that. And if we do notice it for a brief moment, that's all it will be, is a brief moment, because our brains quickly move on to something more pertinent in our own life. So you may be asking yourself, well, if people aren't really worried and thinking about us when we're on stage or presenting, then what are they thinking about? And I'm glad you asked, because the research tells us it's pretty interesting. At any given time, people are thinking about one of 5 things. Food, because they're hungry. They got to go to the bathroom. They're thirsty or they want to drink. Christmas gnomes, which is literally anything and everything else that you could be thinking about. Maybe it's a task or something you have to complete for that day. And then hot guys and hot girls, attractive people. At any given moment, people are thinking about those 5 things. So we're presenting and we are experiencing the symptoms and effects of the spotlight effect, where we think they're judging us. And in reality, they're really not even thinking about us. Like, ask yourself, have you thought about any of these 5 things over the first 7.5 minutes of this presentation? Chances are you have. And that should sort of prove the point, is that our brains wander. We think about other things. We simply don't have the capacity or the willingness to focus all of our attention and judge people when they're presenting. So that takes us to the second reason why folks experience speech anxiety, and that is experience, and 2 things with experience. 1, we have a lack of experience when it comes to the skill set of public speaking, and 2, our prior experiences. So let's examine that. Think back to grade school. Chances are you took a lot of math classes and you took a lot of English classes, but you probably didn't have a class devoted to public speaking. So I want to ask you a very deep and profound question today, and that is, if communication is a foundation for all relationships, then why are we not taught public speaking until adulthood? Now, that's a question that I can't answer for you, but I do think it's a valid question. We're taught math and we're taught English. We value those skill sets, but yet we don't teach public speaking, even though the ability to communicate effectively is so integral to our personal and our professional relationships. I find that interesting. So the second component of experience is bad prior experiences. So unfortunately, we are going to make mistakes. We're going to have speaking presentations and engagements that don't go the way that we had planned.
When you try your best, but you don't succeed.
Guys, listen, it happens to all of us. The best, most seasoned public speakers make mistakes. They experience mishaps in their presentations. Sometimes things happen that we can't even control that can impact our presentation. Don't internalize that. Don't let one bad experience shape your self-confidence and damage your ability to be a successful speaker in future presentations and engagement opportunities. It's the worst thing you can do. Don't let mistakes dictate what your future looks like when it comes to public speaking. If there are skills and things that you need to work on, then identify those. And hopefully today's video will give you some opportunities to think about those things and to identify them and to make a plan of action. But don't let it impact you moving forward. Just simply work on it, build off of it. Don't let prior bad experiences shape who you're going to be tomorrow, because public speaking is a skill set. Remember that. With practice and preparation, you will become better. So the next thing I want to talk about is how physiological reactions to stress, to public speaking anxiety, is involuntary. Involuntary, the key word here, meaning that you don't control these reactions to stress. No one chooses to start talking and have their heart race. Nobody wants their palms to sweat. No one wants to feel the butterflies in the pit of their stomach. Those are involuntary physiological reactions. They just happen to you and we can't control them. And we're going to talk about why that happens. The best example in my personal life I can think of is you're driving down the road and you see a cop. And maybe the cop was hidden, or maybe you just didn't see him. But in that instance, it really doesn't matter, because you experience a physiological reaction to that stress event. In that instance, it's seeing the cop and the fear that maybe you were speeding or that you're going to get pulled over. And we experience the same reactions, that dropping, sinking feeling in the pit of our stomach. Maybe we get flush, our heart races. And then if they turn their siren on and they pull out and they get behind us, those reactions are intensified. And then maybe you've been lucky and the cop drives by you and they pull over the car that was behind you or in front of you. And you promise to yourself that you will never speed again, that you have been so lucky you're not going to speed again. And that lasts for what, like 5 minutes? And then you're back to your normal patterns. That is a physiological response to stress. When someone experiences a stressful event, the amygdala, an area of the brain that contributes to emotional processing, sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. This part of your brain, well, it functions like an air traffic control command center, communicating with the rest of your body through your nervous system to ensure your safety. Epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, floods into your bloodstream and brings on a number of physiological changes. The heart beats faster than normal, pushing blood to the muscles and other vital organs. Pulse rate, blood pressure, both increase. You start to breathe more rapidly. This extra oxygen sent to the brain, increasing alertness. Your sight, hearing, and other senses become sharper. Nutrients flood into your bloodstream, supplying energy and strength to all parts of your body. You experience almost superhuman strength, the fight or flight response. The world slows down. You see it more clearly, so you can respond to it better, but most importantly, so you can survive. You see, your brain's most important function is to keep you alive. The human race has evolved. We've created technology which has radically transformed the world we live in and will continue to do so. We've put people on the moon. We have powerful telescopes that can peer into the deepest, darkest parts of space. We have supercomputers that can perform complex calculations in the blink of an eye. We create data on a scale that could never be conceived before. We have access to nearly all the world's information via a few simple keystrokes on a computer. And we can communicate with just about anyone, anywhere, at any time. But despite these great achievements, our brains still operate much as they did thousands of years ago when they had to protect us from lions, saber-toothed tigers, and dinosaurs. You see, the same part of the brain, the same process that saved our ancestors from predators and ensured they stayed alive, is the exact same part of the brain and the exact same process that gives us speech anxiety and the physiological effects that we experience. So while we might have imagined that speech anxiety is due to societal norms and pressure, it really isn't. This tendency is really there from the primitive days, thousands of years ago, when identifying friend or foe was essential to our survival, reminding us just how primitive our brains still are. So here are some of the physical responses and symptoms that folks often have with speech anxiety. And maybe you have had these yourself, or maybe some of these are symptoms that you experience regularly. One of the best tips that I can give you in terms of dealing with speech anxiety is understanding your pattern of anxiety. So ask yourself, when does your anxiety occur? Does it occur while you plan? Does it occur before you speak, like immediately before you speak? Does it occur for the first 60 seconds? So for me, I get speech anxiety. Yes, I have 3 degrees in communication, including a PhD, and I too suffer from speech anxiety. So for me, it manifests in the minutes preceding the speaking engagement, and then when I walk to the front and start speaking. Now, after about 30 to 60 seconds, I'm fine. My heart quits racing. I settle down a little bit. But up until that point, I actually have speech anxiety and feel the nervousness. So for part of me, for my understanding, is that my pattern of anxiety exists in that way. So what is your pattern of anxiety? How long does it last? Does it last through the duration of your speech? Does it last the first 30 seconds? Maybe you only have anxiety before you prepare and it immediately goes away when you get up and start to speak. So knowing that about yourself can help you a lot. And then what do you do when you experience it? So how do you attempt to manage it currently? And does that work for you? Are there additional resources that you can study and practice that will help you out in regards to that? So one of my top strategies is actually, it's not alcohol. Alcohol does not help you with public speaking anxiety. Maybe, I don't know. Strategy though, an actual strategy, is to know your symptoms and create a plan to manage them. Because the cool thing about our brain working the same way for thousands of years that we just discussed is that it's predictable. So our anxiety manifests itself in the same way. So for instance, if your hands sweat and your heart races, and that's your 2 main symptoms of your personal anxiety with public speaking, then that's probably what you experience every time. You don't have sweaty hands one day and then shortness of breath the next time. Like, it generally follows predictable patterns, and that allows us the opportunity to plan. So for me, for instance, I'm a sweater. Yeah, I know it sounds nasty on the surface level, but it's actually a symptom that a lot of people deal with. So either sweaty hands or sweat under your arms. My hands don't sweat as a symptom for my anxiety personally, but I do sweat a lot under my arms. And I've done this ever since I was a college student 20 years ago. So much so that I would go to the bathroom and I would take toilet paper, toilet tissue, and I would fold it up and I would put it under my arms to try to keep myself from sweating so much. Now, back then I learned there were a few things that I could and couldn't do. One is I couldn't wear a light blue shirt like this because I would sweat right through it. So I could wear a blazer, and that would provide me an extra layer of protection per se. And then also I just learned that it was just something that I had to deal with, and then get into my head that no one really cared. No one was really looking at the fact that I was sweating. It was mainly in my head, my fear that they were judging me based off of something that most people didn't even see. Now, one of the cool things about the increases in technology over the years is now they have prescription strength antiperspirants that you can buy over the counter at any health place, Walgreens, CVS, etc. And you can use these, and they provide a prescription level to really try to block some of that strength. If it really bothers you, you could get Botox. This is a real thing. Google it, I promise you. Sounds painful. I personally, it doesn't bother me enough that I'd want Botox, but it will block it for like 6 months to where your body physically cannot sweat in your hands or under your arms wherever you have this treatment. So if it impacts you enough that it is damaging your self-confidence or impacting your life in a negative way, then by all means, look at these as options or alternatives. I like Sweat Block. I buy this off of Amazon. They're little wipes that you open up and you can just rub them under your arms, or you can rub them on your hands, and it actually blocks your body's ability to sweat in those areas for like up to 7 days. They're cheap, and it's an easy way that I can sort of help control some of my sweat, and it didn't exist when I was in college. So I know that about myself. Did you know that some of the world's best pianists take medication for anxiety? And this is pretty common with musicians and surgeons. People who need a steady hand will actually take beta blockers, which is a medication that is used to treat like high blood pressure. They will take beta blockers, and it slows their heartbeat down and helps them manage or keep their hands from shaking, because shaking hands is another symptom that is quite common in people. And so a lot of musicians take this. So again, depending upon the severity of your symptoms, use whatever approach and methods are out there that help you create and build self-confidence. Do whatever you need to do. Strategy number 3 is dress to impress. This one's easy. You will increase your audience's perception of your credibility, and at the same time, you increase your own self-confidence. So before you even speak your very first word, if you're dressed professionally, the audience is going to perceive you to be more credible. They're going to perceive you to be more knowledgeable, to be more intelligent. They're going to perceive you to be friendlier and more engaged, even when you haven't said anything. It's crazy how our brains work. You'll also increase your own self-confidence. I know I feel better when I dress professionally. When I'm dressed up, I hold my head a little bit higher. I have a little bit more self-confidence, and that helps me in my presentations. You could take the same guy dressed 5 different ways and put him in different contexts, and you would make different judgments about who he is, his character, intelligence, etc., simply based off of how he dresses. So the number one and easiest thing that you can do is dress to impress. These were 3 of my students from the University of Wisconsin in Madison in a business class I taught there, and they were dressed professionally for speech day. They're also practicing power posing, and that is a very popular TED Talk that you can find by Amy Cuddy, and it's called Power Posing. And she talks about how if you stand with your hands on your hips like they're doing here, for 60 seconds, that your body will actually produce and release hormones that boost your self-confidence and help lower speech anxiety. It's an interesting concept, and you can check that out and watch that. It's really cool and interesting. My last and 4th strategy for you is to prepare for the unexpected. Things will happen in a presentation that you didn't plan for. And sometimes these things are out of our control. I've given presentations where the internet went off and links within my PowerPoint wouldn't work. And so I learned to embed my videos in my PowerPoint to avoid that as an issue. I've given speaking engagements where people will randomly blurt out things or ask questions in the middle of a presentation, and it throws my train of thought, and I have to say, well, do I stop and I answer the question, or do I say, hey, we'll come back to that? And what does that do for my flow based off of how I've practiced and prepared? So always remember, regardless of how well prepared you are, some unexpected things will happen, and that this is normal, and that these things will happen to all of us. But lastly, I want you to remember that smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. I love that proverb, which essentially says that it is not in our successes in life that we grow and we learn the most. It is in the times that challenge us. When you experience those setbacks when it comes to public speaking, don't let it damage your self-confidence and impact you negatively moving forward. Use it as an opportunity to learn more about yourself, to learn more about your patterns of anxiety, what you can do to create a plan that works for you and then move forward from that. Public speaking is a skill set, and that means that with time and practice, you can and you will become better. And I look forward to seeing that personal journey in all of you.
Open the doors.